You're listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. In this episode, I interview Midcurrent founder Marshall Cutchin, and we talk about the history of Midcurrent, environmental threats to our fisheries, ecosystem thinking, and some recommended reads from Marshall. Hope you enjoy. This episode of The Sustainable Angler is brought to you by Emerger Strategies, sustainability, sales, and marketing strategies for the 21st century business. Profit sustainably. So I thought I would just start off as I typically do with these, and just to sort of ease into the conversation. It's just a little bit of background on yourself and sort of how you wound up founding Midcurrent and
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I left when I left graduate school. I went into the publishing business. I wanted to run a magazine company when I was in my 20s, and ended up working for a few different magazine publishers and running a division of IMS Health when I was 25. And then one day I had an awakening, if you will, that corporate life was not, despite the fact that I was making a lot of money. And so I went to Florida and bought a skiff and started fishing by myself around Key West, and ended up becoming a guide, having no intention to become a guide, but became a guide for 12 years down there.
Really?
And then I specialized in fly fishing for permit, and tarpon and bonefish, and got to fish with some really great people. Then I decided I wanted to think about raising a family. I was 38 years old, and so I also wanted to write a couple of books. So went to Montana with my future wife and spent a couple of years out there. Then we decided to raise a family, so I moved back east and got back into the corporate world. And in 2003, while I was still working for a big corporation, I saw what was happening with Google search and the web and social media and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, there's an opportunity here. And in my mind, the reason I started Midcurrent was to sort of counter or correct a lot of the misinformation that I was seeing in digital media for fly fishers. Actually, at that time, it was, a lot of the stuff had existed in use groups and things like that. So started Midcurrent, and within about 9 months, it was the most trafficked website on. I think it was the one of the first fly fishing blogs in it, and it was definitely the first that was continuously published. But within 9 months, it became the most popular fly fishing website on the internet, and went from there. Just kept building it. It was a one-man show for about 3 or 4 years, and then we started selling ads and paying writers and photographers, and it just kept growing from there. Now it's about 25,000 pages of content, and we just relaunched a new version of the site in December.
Yeah, and when I first started, so, I didn't start fly fishing until I was 24. I mean, I guess I had tried it a couple of times, like on a family vacation, but not really, without any success, and didn't care for it too much, I guess. And then when I was 24, I started getting into fly fishing more seriously in terms of just absolutely loving it. And Midcurrent that was in 2008. So
yep.
Midcurrent was like, just staple go-to resource for, like, hey, you want to just go in there, search, find interesting information and articles, and have always been a a subscriber and have certainly benefited from y'all doing what you do. So thank you for that.
Sure. Thanks for sticking with us.
No, it's awesome, and the new site is really great. Love the look and the feel, and super easy to navigate, and just it just looks a lot better.
Oh, you can say improvement. Definitely. Thank you.
So anyway, tell me a little bit. So you mentioned you were a former guide. So one of the things in having talked to some folks in fly fishing is there is a little bit of a theme of I tried to make it work in the real world and just couldn't hack it. Not couldn't hack it, but I just was
Sure.
like, that was just not a priority for me. Like that was just not what I valued, and not how I wanted to spend my time.
Yep.
So you moved to the Keys and became a fly fishing guide. I mean, what was there like a single moment or a revelation where you were just like, I can't, this is it, like no more, that's it, I'm out of here?
Yeah, I think the moment actually was when my immediate superior asked me to lie about some financial figures. Yeah, so that was the that'll
was
do
sort
of a signal that maybe I was compromising my own principles. I mean, I think anybody who's been in the corporate world for a while knows that the things you're asked to do don't always align with your morality or sense of what's right. But for me, it was just a little bit too much to bear, and I was, in my mid-20s and still pretty idealistic about the world in general. So that was the trigger that made me think maybe I needed to go off for a while and think about this.
Right. Well, that's awesome. And so having spent 12 years down in the Keys guiding, I mean, that had to have been a great experience. Are there noticeable differences in the fishery today compared to when you were down there?
Well, first the good part. Those 12 years were other than raising a family and having kids and being married for 20 years, that they were the best years of my life, or absolutely priceless in terms of what they taught me and how much I learned about people and myself. But on the subject of how things have changed, one of the problems we've got culturally in addressing environmental issues, in my opinion, is this concept of shifting baseline, which I'm sure you've touched on many times before. But the average person when they go to the Florida Keys today still sees what they think of as just a incredibly beautiful setting and giant ocean vistas that and sparkling sunsets and the fishing is still good, not compared to what it used to be. So it's really hard for people to appreciate how much things have changed unless they've had a few decades of experience. I started fishing there in 1977 or 78, and to me, the experience of seeing that place for the first time was just life changing, and that was, of course, when I decided to become a guide, the thing that really was calling me back to it. But the difference in biodiversity and marine ecosystems and general health of the nearshore ecosystems is just really stunning. It's hard to even get a grip on it, because a lot of the data that we have now is not historical, because we don't have the data from 30 years ago. Variations in funding and lack of funding, and even recently Florida cutting back on a lot of their monitoring and water quality measurement means that the historical trend lines that need to be traced are still very hard to follow, and the research teams at the universities are not getting the funding they need. They're doing a great job, but just to give an example, we don't know whether the changes in the seagrass beds in the Keys are because of loss of diversity, or there could actually be some epigenetic changes going on in the seagrass species themselves. So when you have a algae bloom, like has been very common in Florida Bay, which is in the north part of the Keys, those algae blooms have been increasingly common in the last couple of decades. They kill off the seagrass populations, and you see a lot of reports of seagrass coming back, but what is actually happening is there's only one species of grass that's coming back, and it used to be that that benthic marine system had multiple species of grass. So it may temporarily look okay, but in fact it's not okay, and it's lost its resilience. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but just from an overall perspective, to my eye, and I've been fishing down there for quite a long time, the changes are really stunning.
Yeah. No, and I mean that's I'm all for it being long-winded, because I don't have I didn't start. I have some friends of mine who we make an annual trip down to the Everglades, and have fished in the Keys a few times, and this will be our 5th year coming up of our trip down there. But that's what I know of it, So having someone who has fished down there for as long as you have, and has witnessed that change, is that's the that intellectual data you can't you really can't put a dollar value on that. You've witnessed it. Which is interesting to me, because we go down there and we're like, man, this is amazing,
Yeah, I know. Well, it is amazing, but as I tell people, think of how amazing it is right now, and imagine it being 10 times better than that.
Right. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Right?
I mean, yeah.
So when I was down there, when I first started permit fishing, one of the biggest issues was seeing the fish, because on all of the grass flats, the grass was so deep and so dark that it was really hard to see fish. Now it's much, much easier to see fish. That may play a role in the total number of permit and bonefish and tarpon being caught down there. Wouldn't be surprised if it is.
Interesting.
But is that a signal of better ecosystem health? I don't think so. So you could say, well, if more fish are being caught, then that means that everything's fine. Well, I don't think so. I don't think that's a very accurate perception of what's going on.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I saw this, and admittedly, before I even say this, like I scanned this article, but they were basically saying that what you're going to start seeing because of the loss of phytoplankton due to climate change is that, in fact, water, oceans will become bluer and greener.
Right.
And that was, I mean, maybe that's part of it. I don't know, but it's pretty interesting to see, how interconnected it all is.
Sure. Well, a lot of people, look at beautiful pictures of the Caribbean waters, and it's crystal clear and blue and inviting, and they think, oh gosh, that's really clean water. But in fact, the reason that the colder waters of the North Atlantic are, green and murky in a lot of cases is because they have so much more life in them. The warmer tropical waters are actually much more sterile.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean that's it's I was born and raised in Savannah and live in Charleston, and I mean that was the thing that most people, they look at our water and think it's really dirty, but it's in fact just very nutrient rich. That's not just clever marketing.
No, it's the marsh. The coastal marshes there are huge. Hugely significant in seafood production and species health and all kinds of things. Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know if I mentioned, but we had a house in the Isle of Palms until I was in college. Yeah, so I spent all my summers down there fishing and crabbing.
Love it.
So I got to see again what that was like. And it was just really just an amazing environment. Maybe the changes aren't as noticeable there as they are in the Keys, but I'm sure they've changed quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's even from from when I was a kid to now. This is anecdotal. This is just from what I've witnessed. But you don't catch as many crabs as you used to, and that that's just one species. Then what is the ripple effect on the entire ecosystem? If that starts to dwindle. Since we're kind of on this topic of environmental threats, I mean, what is would you say are maybe it's one or maybe it's several things, but what are some of the greatest environmental threats to our fisheries that are most concerning to you?
Saltwater or freshwater or both?
Sure, let's do both.
Sure. So I think we'll start with saltwater since we touched on that first. I think the attention, public attention is focused on commercial and recreational fishing and catch rates and quotas and all of the sort of highly visible measurements of ocean health. Mm-hmm. But I think it glosses over some really important missing pieces, like the impact of agricultural pollution and other types of pollution, certainly CO2 pollution and its contribution to global warming, which is leading to ocean acidification and coral bleaching. My perspective is sort of tied to my thinking about sort of the ethos of fishing and its relation to conservation in general, I guess. And that is that we need to pay attention to the larger picture, and I don't think anglers in general, and I could, I'll blame myself in part for not being as educated as I could have been in a lot of cases on a lot of these issues, but anglers in general not really wanting to see the larger picture and address the issues in terms of priorities. So we can establish recreational quotas, and we can encourage people to release fish, and we can be responsible, not throwing our beer cans in the ocean the way everybody did 30, 40 years ago. But if we're doing nothing to improve the health of nearshore ecosystems as a whole, in the end, we're fighting a losing battle, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I try to encourage anglers who care about the future of fisheries to think more holistically in terms of if they have time, energy, or money to put into working towards solutions, to look at the larger scale and look at the priorities and think about those things that are having the biggest impact and put their efforts into changing the things that make the most difference, as opposed to doing what I like to call buying their environmental indulgence, sending off their $35 membership fee to whatever organization. And I'm not downplaying the importance of those organizations, but I think that it's easy for us to feel like we're doing something when we may not really be doing anything at all.
Yep.
I guess that sort of covers the saltwater side of things. I think there's, could talk forever about it. But critical habitats like Chesapeake Bay, like the Florida Keys, all up and down the East Coast of the United States, and Gulf Coast, those areas that I'm familiar with, have seen huge degradation in the last 40 years. And I think, again, we need to really think intelligently about what the priorities need to be and not get sidetracked on issues that aren't going to have necessarily an impact on future generations and their ability to go out and enjoy the water.
And I'll just say to talk a little bit about that. I guess to add to it maybe, but especially since you have experience here in the Low Country, spending summers in Isle of Palms, one of the cool things that that different nonprofit conservation groups do here in Charleston is, and they do it in Georgia too, is oyster reef restoration, and that is, I guess the point I'm making is that it's not just, hey, I support conservation and I'll do what I can to do less bad. It's about how do we actually improve the fishery and the health of the ecosystem. And, oysters are a keystone species here, and you have healthy oyster beds, you have cleaner water, you have better fishing because it provides habitat for, smaller creatures that work its way up the food chain. And I think that's a good example of, not just doing less bad, but actually improving the fishery for the future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
All right. So, what about what are your thoughts on freshwater and environmental threats that are relevant and
yeah.
critical?
So I think that they're not altogether different. I think there is an underappreciation of the impact of agricultural pollution on species health. I think there's certainly an underappreciation of the impact of global warming on species health, and it's another situation where applying Band-Aids, when what you really need is emergency surgery,
right.
is distracting to people, and especially I think there's a big difference between the eastern half of the United States, or the East Coast, and the West in the United States in terms of challenges, because the East Coast, of course, is densely populated. It actually has a great deal of tree cover, forest growth, second, third, fourth generation forest growth, and by comparison, the West is overgeneralizing, but much drier. Water resources are much more scarce and getting scarcer. Tree and forests are showing more immediate results of a warming climate and changes in parasite populations and things like that. Beetle devastation is something that everybody understands because they've seen all the pictures of it. And in the last couple of years, we see a lot more wildfires because of rising water temperatures and changes in the resilience of the forests themselves. So, those challenges are probably more acute in the West. But on the other hand, the West has more, quote unquote, natural resources. There's more trout fishing in the West than there is in the East. The water, generally speaking, is cleaner in the West than it is in the East. That doesn't mean that it's not worth paying attention to the East, but it's just a different level of challenge. I remember, I can't remember, I don't know the dates, maybe it was 10 years ago that Atlanta went through a period of severe drought, and those groups and government agencies that had advocated for protection of rivers and trout species, when it came to whether or not people should have water for irrigation and drinking, quickly broke all the rules on protection of rivers in order to ensure continued economic stability and growth. So, it's not a situation that the eastern United States is not immune to the same issues, or and also needs solutions. But it's obviously really acute out here in the West. Dewatering rivers as populations grow is a huge problem in the West. And I think the more we learn about rivers as vast ecosystems and not just these, channels of water running through the landscape, but instead, really being the underpinnings of a really complex ecosystem, the more we realize that we can't just go through and take water out of the rivers at will without paying a big price for it.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that I'm, as you were describing this, and a couple of things that you said, which is kind of a little bit of a theme, I think, in our conversation so far, is thinking holistically and about ecosystem thinking. Not just I need water today, take it. Like having that. I actually read oddly enough, this morning about the famous scientist, and I forget his name, but it's Humboldt, who started making those types of connections, right? Of looking at, hey, look, this is not just the effects of this have ripple effects. So we're all interconnected. Ecosystems, everything plays a critical role. So you have to think broader, I guess, is the ultimate conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a great example of that is in recent years, you're seeing an increasing number of great trout fishing rivers in the West have see dramatically less insect life, fewer caddisflies, fewer mayflies. I think it has more of an impact on mayflies because they're more dependent on clean water. But when you erase or you degrade that primary food source for a species, then it has a ripple effect. We don't even know what the ripple effects are, but we know that it's going to have an impact on fish populations, whether it's those fish changing their dietary habits or whatever it is. But in general, the systems themselves become less resilient and more vulnerable. No, you're absolutely right. And getting back to something you said earlier too, I just would comment. when I started Midcurrent in 2003, I created an informal rule that we would never publish pictures of grip and grin photos. And my thinking, honestly, about doing it at that time was that we needed to promote better handling of fish, more catch and release, and greater awareness among anglers that as I think it was Lee Wolf who first said, fish are too valuable to be caught only once. But as I've gotten older and become more aware of these issues, my thinking has shifted to thinking that the reason we need to stop worshiping ourselves and our trophyism mentality, or whatever it is, our egos, is simply that we have to start seeing fish as just a part of this overall system that enables us to go out and enjoy doing what we do. They're not, I've written about this a couple of times, but you take a fish out of the water and you hold him up for a picture in front of the camera. It's really a celebration of you, not the fish, and I think it's a misplacement of priorities again, or a misplacement of awareness when we celebrate that kind of stuff. And by the way, I've taken plenty of grip and grin photos in my life, and I've got plenty of evidence that I was on the wrong side of that equation. So, but I think the point is that those of us who know more about the impacts of what we're doing out there do need to provide some leadership. And I think, for example, I think we could provide leadership by not messaging the kind of things that sort of take fish out of context and treat them more like a really key part of a much larger and more interesting and complex system.
Yeah, and something that so completely agree, and I'm just as guilty as anyone is of a grip and grin. Although the more I learn, the more I try and change my ways there. But it's what we're talking about, like ecosystem and ecosystem services and holistic thinking. It's also talking about valuing a mayfly just as much as a brown trout. I think that's part of it is our valuation of what's more valuable in the stream, the brown trout, or is it a whitefish? They certainly, you can get upset when you catch a whitefish if you want to, but they play a role in that ecosystem. So why do we value that less? I guess maybe it's ego. You know what you're after and you know what you want, but that's I think that's part of it too, is understanding that everything from the plants that surround the river they all play their role in contributing to this overall ecosystem, and to not value them is missing the point.
Absolutely. Yep.
So anyway, all right. So we've sort of talked about threats, and one of the things that I like to focus on is to try and talk about solutions or success stories, because I read a lot about environmental threats, particularly climate change and plastic pollution and things of that nature. But it's also pretty depressing to only read those things. So I also like to focus on what are there any interesting success stories or anything like that you would like to share? I'm leaving this sort of wide open, but anything along those lines. Because I do like to try and promote a message of hope here.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it is easy to lose sight of success stories, and I think I had this conversation with somebody not too long ago because they kept sending me news stories of example, sturgeon recovery in the James River, or hey, they found an Atlantic salmon in this river in Connecticut. Wow, there was one fish. They found a fish. And I just thought to myself, well, what's the difference between that story and a real success story? And so I tried to figure out in my head what it was. I'm always trying to figure out what it is that is meaningful and what's just pure drivel. So, and my area of knowledge is really South Florida. That's where I've spent most of the last 30 years that I've been involved in environmental issues, thinking about. And when I was in the Keys in the late 80s, I was a founding member of a group called Reef Relief. And our original mission was to prevent anchor damage to the reefs by commercial diving operations. So we began by installing buoys on the reefs down there. They're still down there, and then Reef Relief is still an organization with a somewhat changed mission, I think. But one of the things we did help accomplish was getting the National Marine Sanctuary established in the Keys in, I believe it was 1991. Not sure of the actual date now. But I do believe that without the National Marine Sanctuary being established down there, that the Keys would be in much worse condition than they are right now. National Marine Sanctuary System brought lots of good, intelligent people working on large-scale solutions. So establishing management plans, creating protection zones, and studying the impacts of overfishing and nearshore pollution and so on and so forth. And one bright spot in the Keys, at least, not Florida overall, is that it used to be that septic systems in the Keys, most of the Keys was not connected with any sewage system, waste disposal system at all. And a lot of money has been spent, some federal money, some state money, to basically create a sealed system so that septic systems aren't leaching bacteria and into local waters. So the nearshore waters of the Florida Keys, and I'm talking about within, a couple hundred feet of the shoreline, especially, are much, much cleaner than they were 30 years ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So a lot of good, changes and a lot of good effort by some really focused people has resulted in some positive stuff down there in the Keys. In South Florida in general right now, I don't know if you're aware of what's been happening regarding Everglades restoration and the ending of discharges to the east and west coast from Lake Okeechobee, but there's been a dramatic shift in political will to address the issues down there. Something that honestly a lot of us never thought we'd see in our lifetimes or in the next 10 or 20 years. But a new Republican administration has taken the bull by the horns. Brian Mast, in particular, who is a congressman from, I think it's St. Lucie County, but I'm not sure exactly what the name of the district is, has introduced legislation to take the issue of water being incorrectly managed down there to being one of simply, basically, gerrymandering the water from in one direction or the other to suit the interests of agriculture or flood control or this, that, or the other, raising it to the level of a true health issue, which is really the thing that's going to, I think, make the difference in being responsible and forcing the players who up until this time have not been forced to be responsible for water quality to actually begin doing their jobs down there. So a lot of really good changes happening right now in South Florida, and there's still an incredible amount of work to do. There's still 100 years of toxic sludge on the bottom of Lake Okeechobee, but at least we're not. There's some light at the end of the tunnel that maybe we won't continue to do all the stuff that contributed to the problem in the first place.
Yeah, I've kept up with it a little bit, but that was definitely probably the most exciting thing that I think has happened certainly this year for Florida. And I know that there's so many different organizations that are involved in helping to support that, but as always, like you said, it's been the lack of political will, and now that's starting to change. So that is definitely amazing news. And I honestly didn't pay attention to it as much until, like I mentioned earlier, some friends and I go down to the Everglades every year and we camp and fish, and you start to realize, first off, just what an incredibly unique place the Everglades and the Keys and everywhere is. But, to even the thought of putting that at risk is like mind numbing, it's just, it's such a cool place. If you haven't been down there, I cannot recommend it enough. It is a truly, probably one of the most unique places on the planet.
No question about it.
And definitely excited to see that there's progress being made to protect it. But the interesting thing that you mentioned too, it's like it comes down to, and if that's what it takes, I'm all for it. Talking about, look, this is going to affect your health. It's like, okay, well, hang on, we need to pay attention to this. Let's build platforms on that then.
Well, as I mentioned to somebody this morning, there was a Washington Post article, I think on January 29th. I don't know if you saw it, but the impacts of rising temperatures on fisheries and agriculture, et cetera, and it's just a reminder of something that Teddy Roosevelt said a century ago. He said that Americans don't respond to information; they respond to catastrophe. So I'm paraphrasing, but the fact is that most people won't lift a finger to get involved and help make changes until the bad news is knocking on their personal front door. And that, unfortunately, may have been what happened in Florida this past year, with people literally not being able to walk outside because the cyanobacteria was literally burning their nasal passages.
Right.
Then of course people start equating that with loss of property value, and then the bells start to ring, and people say, well, maybe this is actually something we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I guess I do want to be cognizant of your time, Marshall. But I was wondering I've got a couple more questions for you, just from a time perspective.
Sure, I'll try not to be so long-winded in my response.
No. I'm all, you make my job easy. So a couple of things. One, so I've always loved. So shifting gears a little bit here. I've always loved Midcurrents. You always have like the latest in fly fishing books, and which is obviously something I enjoy reading, and have made a lot of book purchases based on y'all's recommendations. And what are some of anything new happening on that front, or any books related to conservation that you'd like to recommend to someone who may be looking for the next good read?
Oh gosh, there are a lot of them.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I guess they're kind of two separate categories. Fly fishing versus conservation books. I think it depends on whether your interest on the fly fishing side is more in how to or in just sort of the culture of fly fishing. Yvon Chouinard just came out with this second edition of Simple Fly Fishing, which is focuses on Tenkara style fishing, and I say Tenkara style fishing because he sort of took Tenkara and turned it into something a little bit easier and more accessible, I think, for a lot of people. Yeah, that's a really great book. Just philosophically, trying to simplify the sport of fly fishing is a good thing. Yeah. Really deep in the weeds, and there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, one of the great and most interesting aspects of fly fishing is being able to, drill down and make an exact replica, of a specific species of mayfly, then match a hatch, that sort of thing, and do the same thing in salt water where you've got, a specific species of shrimp that you're trying to imitate because it's clear that the fish are keying in on that. But also there's the other side of that, which is, we need and we want people to not be intimidated by the sport. So that's a great book for helping with that. Yep. There are a couple of good books in the tying world. I don't know if they're very interesting. There was also a popular book that came out this last year called The Feather Thief, which is a nonfiction story about a guy who was actually a tyer and collector in England who broke into a major museum there and stole a very rare collection of feathers to sell on the black market.
Oh my God!
Just a great story overall, and a really kind of a statement about endangered species and the role of museums and stuff like that as well.
Interesting.
On the general environmental front, I just finished a great book called The Overstory by Richard Powers. And if you're an environmentalist, I highly recommend it. It's not only he's not only a great writer, but the story itself is long and complex, and I just it was the kind of book I was reading. I wished it would never end, but it focuses on trees and and with the backdrop of the greater awareness we have of the importance of forests and forest communities to our own happiness as human beings. So that's definitely up there on the list.
Well, you mentioned this. Well, I guess you didn't mention it, but I know that with what Midcurrent does, what role and do you think that social media has in helping to create more awareness about these environmental challenges and threats that we face?
Well, as you can tell from my comments about trophy photos, right. I think it plays a big role. Not always on the right side of the messaging. And I think you see some changes in awareness. Just the fact that emergent strategies exist is quite a statement about where we are now versus where we were 20 years ago. I think there is there's more energy within fishing communities around correcting some of the things that we didn't get right the first time. As far as digital media and publishing and social media, they're not always the same thing, but I think messaging matters. I think people, especially younger people, and I know, I'm concerned more about the next generation than I am about our own generation. I have kids who love the outdoors, and I want them to have kids who have a chance to experience some of the stuff that I've experienced. So I think that those people who are new new to fishing, new to fly fishing especially, we have an opportunity to get it right as far as the messaging goes, and I think that requires some commitment to saying the right thing. I'll give you an example. My son, who's 18 years old, is helping us with our Instagram account. And he came to me last night and he said, "Dad, you really need to publish more grip and grin photos on the Instagram account because we'll get more follows."
Oh, absolutely. Bigger the fish, the more the follows.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, girl in a bikini or a big fish, right? Or both, or preferably both, right?
Right.
So I said to him, and it was kind of a tough situation, because I told him, "Hey, you're responsible for growing our account, but on the other hand, there are certain rules that we can't. They're artificial rules, but they're really important rules because this is a problem that we have. We have a problem with people, young people especially, perceiving the sport of fly fishing as just being one of, you go out, you hop on a plane, you fly to Wyoming, you catch a big trout, and 2 days later you enjoy all the new follows you have on Instagram, and that's their perception of the sport of fly fishing."
Right.
That's not a message I think we need to be telling kids. What we need to be telling kids is it's a whole lot more interesting, and it's a whole lot deeper than that kind of superficial marketing would lead you to believe. So I don't think we're doing any favors by encouraging that kind of culture, if you will, and social sharing.
Yeah.
Okay,
and then so that question just sort of came out of the blue, and I was like, "Oh, I wonder what Marshall thinks about this." So final question, I guess, is if you could leave a message for anglers out there about the importance of protecting the environment for nothing else, for our fishery's sake and future generations, what might that be?
I think the message is, that the answers to the issues that we see, looming on the horizon, or that we're facing right now. We're facing loss of anadromous salmon on the West Coast. We're facing depletion of forage fish and game fish like stripers on the East Coast. I think the answer lies in widening your perspective and paying attention to sort of the relative impacts of the things that are out there in the media, and be skeptical. Be skeptical of everyone, including Midcurrent or anybody else who's sending a message that you may feel is not digging deep enough and not addressing the issue in all of its complexity, because we have a tendency to oversimplify a lot of these problems, or to think that if we fix a problem superficially, if we I hesitate to give examples because then it sounds like I'm picking on people, but I'm not picking on anybody. But small projects that are intended to raise money but don't have long-term impacts are good at one level because they get people involved in making a difference. But oftentimes the biggest differences are made at the level of politics and public engagement. And I would just encourage people to think in terms of the public interest as a whole, as opposed to always thinking of private interest first, because I think we're all in this together. And again, I think the correct place for us to be putting energies is thinking about the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I think that's what's going to make the difference ultimately. Is realizing that you're stealing the next generation's ability to want to enjoy and protect the sport that we all do. But so with that, Marshall, I will wrap it up. But I would just like to say on a personal note, Todd Tanner had put us in touch. I don't know, a couple of years ago when I was first starting Emerger Strategies, and
yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
and I just wanted to thank you for being willing to listen and give some advice, and thank you for everything that y'all do at Midcurrent. Like I said, it's a website that I check often, and certainly look forward to y'all's newsletters, and just really appreciate you carving out some time for me today, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, it's very, very nice of you to say all that, and I really do appreciate it, and thank you for doing what you do too. And so we're all working toward the same goals, I think, and I think we've got a passion to see the right thing happen. So thank you as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. For more episodes, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Thanks for listening.